From Rixie, this is Debuff, and I'm your host, Steve Skeels. Today, I'll be talking about the Nintendo Direct Mini, the Xbox Games Showcase, and Carrion. After a long drought without any news from Nintendo, we got a mini Direct, and it's come out to mixed reception. The date of a Direct was leaked by Twitter user Kelios and obviously got people hyped, but I think people were quickly disappointed when it was announced to be a mini partner showcase. If you liked any of the games shown, then you probably were good with it, but it feels like there was a lot of people who found no interest in any of the few games shown off. All they had in the Western Direct was Cadence of Hyrule DLC, Rogue Company, WWE 2K Battlegrounds, and Shin Megami Tensei 3 and 5. Cadence of Hyrule is cool, and I think it's great that it has done well enough to get DLC, but I think any rhythm game is hit or miss, so it probably didn't get too many excited. Rogue Company is a new team shooter from Hi-Rez Studios which launched on early access for the Switch the same day. That's exciting for people into these kind of games, and I think it looks good. I've seen some positive impressions so far, but I haven't tried it myself. Now, WWE 2K Battlegrounds is interesting, but I think it's certainly more of a niche game. I've seen some excitement for it, and I do think it's nice to see some more sports games that appeal to a different crowd than the typical Nintendo titles. The last games shown were Shin Megami Tensei 3 Remastered and Shin Megami Tensei 5. Pretty hyped about this myself, but mostly because SMT5 was one of the first third-party games announced for the Switch, and it's finally resurfaced, even with a release date, or window rather, of 2021. These games are pretty popular and are part of the series that Persona comes from, so I think this will get a lot of RPG fans excited. One thing I found a bit strange about this presentation is that they cut 2 games out of the Western presentation and were only showed in the Japan Direct, and I personally think both of these games look great. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin was shown again, and it's launching this November. This is a hybrid side-scroller with simulation and farming mechanics. I personally think it looks beautiful, and the combat and exploration look pretty fun. I'm not typically a fan of simulation mechanics, but I think it looks like an interesting concept, and I can't wait to see some more. And the last game shown was Atelier Ryza 2, Lost Legends, and the Secret Fairy, the sequel to the best-selling Atelier game. This was all but confirmed before the announcement, and this marks the series' first, with a protagonist returning in a starring role for a second title. It has new mechanics building upon the first, and looks like another great game for fans of the series. It's also just the push I needed to start playing my copy of Ryza 1. Overall, I think this was probably a bit disappointing for most, like I said, especially after a long time without any Switch news. But I'm definitely interested in some of these games myself, and they've said it's the first in a series of these partner directs, so I'm sure there's more to come. Though, I definitely just want to see more news from Nintendo themselves. Next up is the second Xbox Games Showcase, and in my opinion, this was a lot better than the one we got back in May. I think this was a good presentation by Microsoft, and it showed off a lot of great-looking games. Though I still think that they should have shown off more gameplay, and I still think it's a bit too early for me to say whether there's really anything that's going to convince me to get a Series X. But that's also mainly because a lot of these games are going to be available on PC as well. Something really cool for Xbox fans is that if you have Game Pass, everything shown is available on Game Pass. That's such a good deal, and it's got to be nice to know that you can feel free to try any of these games that look interesting rather than looking out for a few that you might want to buy. So, on to what they actually showed. And as usual, there was a lot, so I'm just going to roll through it. The pre-show for basically the Summer Games Fest, hosted by Jeff Keighley, had some cool stuff like Dragon Quest XI's on Xbox and Balan Wonderland, a new game from Square Enix's new studio, aptly named Balan Company. Some of the games shown were cool, but mainly were small announcements to lead up to the actual event. And to start off the Xbox showcase, of course they opened up with Halo Infinite, and we finally got to see some gameplay. This is the big one, guys, and it looks like exactly what I want. Yes, it's going to be different. It looks like it might be a bit open world, or at least sandbox style, compared to what the older, more linear Halo games were. But the footage they showed was so reminiscent of Combat Evolved, and the gunplay looks spot on. I really can't wait to see more about this game, and if it leans into the games as a service model, or at least continued release expansions or something like that, then I think this will be a killer app for Game Pass. Then of course, they also always have to show off the next Forza game, which looks amazing, though I couldn't tell you if there's anything new to it other than the graphics, but it looks amazing. There's no doubt about that. This game looks crazy. We got another look at Everwild, Rare's new game, which also looks amazing, but we still don't really know what it will play like. The graphics look pretty cool, and the idea of it that they described seems interesting, but I have no idea what's going on here. One thing that got me excited was a trailer for Obsidian's new RPG, Avowed, which Mason immediately texted me after saying Bethesda better be sweating, and I agree. Even though they barely showed anything about it, looks like a first-person action RPG, and that's enough to get my attention. Another game that really caught my eye, which I wasn't so sure about in the previous presentation, was The Medium, and this might be my favorite game shown other than Halo. This game looks like you'll be exploring through two parallel worlds rendered at the same time, and I think that sounds like a really intriguing concept. Very similar to the mission The Crack in the Slab from Dishonored 2. A whole game of navigating through what looks like a normal world and then some kind of hell-like dimension would be great fun. And besides some of these that I've already mentioned, I think the big thing that people have been waiting for was Fable 4, which was pretty much confirmed before this, but I'm glad they actually showed that they're working on it. It's cool that it's being made, but unfortunately there was no gameplay, which I don't know how far along they are, but I think this could have really tied it up if they actually showed how the game is going to be. But that's okay, we'll wait and see. One thing I do want to note, which got me pretty interested as well, is the new Phantasy Star Online, which interestingly enough is a timed console exclusive for Xbox. It's a bit strange that the least popular console for Japanese games is getting something like this rather than, I don't know, maybe a more popular Japanese title, but I think it's a good sign that they're actually delivering on the promise to get more Japanese studio support. There were, of course, tons of other games, but most weren't too interesting to me or they didn't really show enough to get me excited. Which again, I think that's a problem here. They still aren't showing a lot of gameplay. Maybe they're not ready, but I do think that Microsoft needs to be working on showing more gameplay to get people really excited. There were a lot of interesting games and definitely titles that I want to play, but I just don't know what the hardware is going to do to make me feel like I need to pick these up. We need to see more than just renders, even if those renders are an engine, showing what the console's capable of and how these games are going to play different on Xbox is really what they need. Though they have said they are planning to have additional showcases, so I'll stay optimistic that they just didn't want to show off too much for now and want to build up hype closer to the release of the console. The last topic for today is Carrion. This is a game developed by Phobia Games and published by Devolver Digital. I think it looks like a pretty cool title. Released on July 23rd for PC, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch, the game currently has a 77 on Metacritic and seems to be positively received overall. It's a 2D action game that they are describing as a reverse horror, where the player takes control of the monster and wreaks havoc on those who imprisoned it. And the story for it is basically that. You're a creature of unknown origin that is being experimented on by a biotech company, but once you break free, you exact your vengeance on everything in your path as you work your way out of this prison. I find the concept to be pretty unique for a video game, and it comes together with a fantastic pixel art style and some great music to set the tone. The monster you play as is an amorphous mass of flesh that can grow and shrink as you play the game, with 3 different sizes that all have their own benefits. As you get bigger, you'll be stronger, and the smaller form is best for stealth. That's kind of a basic rundown, but there's more to it as you play. You'll lose mass as you take damage, and gain it as you consume enemies. But you can also choose to lose some of your mass at certain points and pick it back up later as needed. You'll gain upgrades and abilities as you progress, and while the game is a bit open, it isn't a Metroidvania-style game where backtracking to use your new upgrades is a constant necessity. Much of the exploration is optional, and many have even said that there isn't much incentive to actually go back and look for new things. And also as you progress, enemies will become more difficult, replacing the helpless lab members with soldiers armed to stop you, so you'll have to work to overcome them as you get further into the game. The one big complaint I've heard is that it has no mini-map, so it becomes a chore to figure out where to go and where you've been, especially if you can get lost easily in games. However, this isn't really the first time an open world 2D map has lacked an actual way to point you out to where to go, and I don't think it'll be too big of a deal unless getting lost easily frustrates you. Additionally, some people may be left wanting more from the story, as there isn't a lot to it. The description I gave is generally all you get, with little information on the monster and what's going on in the world itself. However, if you want a unique experience, or just want something that makes you feel like a brutal powerhouse, this game would be good for you. And as it can be cleared in under about 5 hours, it isn't a big commitment either. Debuff is hosted by me, Steve Skeels, edited and mixed by Mason Carlton. Follow us on Instagram at DebuffPod. That's DebuffPod. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.